So this was my experiment that I started this year, which is dyeing. I want to experiment with dyeing with Hopi Black sunflowers. So these are a special kind of sunflower that were developed apparently by the Hopi to be used in dyeing. The seeds from these sunflowers will make a maroon to purple to black dye color. And in looking it up online and seeing the extraction process, it's pretty simple to do. So today I'm going to be experimenting with making dyes out of these sunflowers. They have been growing here, since the spring when we planted them. It's mid-August, almost mid-August now. And you can see this guy is all done. His leaves are still alive, but the petals are gone. But boy, these seed heads are absolutely huge. So I'm gonna chop this right at the seed head, and I've got my basket underneath to catch it. And oof. Oh wow. So this is some of the external part broke off, and you can see that black underneath. Those are the seeds that we will be extracting from here to make the dyes. This is really exciting. Now, I've been processing for a while here. I've done a couple of seed heads. And as you can see, this process isn't quick, but it's yielding these lovely sunflowers. And do they have dye? The answer is yes, because look at my thumb and index finger where I'm pulling them out. They're already turning a really nice shade of purple, which, as we add those to the dye pot a little later, we are going to hope that they will completely release that dye color, which then I will add to dye blankets. More to come later. So I finished about 2 hours of hulling. I didn't hull or seed all of those sunflowers, but I did a lot. I've got what I think is just about a pound here. So the formula is to fill this with 3 quarts of water per this roughly pound of seeds, and to bring them to a boil, and then simmer them for about 30 minutes until the seeds split open and release their dye. All right, so the Hopi Black Dye Sunflower seeds have been cooking for about a half an hour, and a couple of things. One, very cool, you'll notice the seeds all sunk. They were all kind of floating at the top, and now they're down at the bottom. So that was kind of neat. You can see that they have split open for the most part. You can see they're kind of, the kernels are kind of open there and flaking. So that's a good sign. And this color, I think, is also, you can't experience this in the video, but the smell of these are really lovely. It smells like something nice cooking. But yeah, you can see that dye color. Look at that. That is dark purple. Now, one of the things that I read, what's interesting is sometimes dye water is not what you end up with when you dye fabric. So you need things called mordants and modifiers, and they will change the way the dye is colored. One of the things I read in my Hopi dye book is that they recommend alum root, which I don't have alum root, but I do have processed alum. This is very similar in chemical composition and perhaps even identical to what you use for pickling. Pickling alum. I've used that in a pinch when I didn't have some of this kind. So what I'm going to do, I really want this to be purple when I dye with it. And what I read in the Hopi book is that you use alum. So I'm going to guesstimate about a tablespoon based on what they said. So I'm gonna stir that in there. And the power's off. I'm not cooking it anymore. They said to not cook it more than a half an hour. Sometimes if you overcook dyes, you'll actually lose the color. So I turned it off faithfully, kept it from doing too much of a rolling boil. And now the next step will be to strain it. This will be my bucket for holding the dye material and where I'm going to put the dye blankets to soak. So the next stage will be for me to get a strainer so that I can strain the dye materials, the seeds out, and get the dye in the bucket. And I'm going to gently pour. Wow, look at that color. Holy moly, that is vivid purple. That is exciting. Yipes, that is a rich, rich, rich purple color. So there's not a lot of water in here. There's not a lot of liquid. So what I am going to do, but this is concentrated. I was trying to think of that word earlier. What this is a dye concentrate. It's quite thick and quite rich. So I'm going to add just enough water so that my dye blankets can float around in there without bumping into each other, and they can be well saturated. I've got several different dye blankets that I cut with some new flannel. I've got a 15 by 60 inch. I have a 14 by 72 inch, and these are all sizes of scarves that I've got soaking in that other pot. And I have an 8 by 54, the smallest size. Let me see. So I'm going to take my stick. Yeah, look at that color. That is incredible. That's amazing. Look at this, in 5 minutes in the dye pot, it's as dark as my shirt. That's incredible. I am beyond delighted. So these will just sit here and saturate overnight. And then tomorrow morning, because it's now 6:30, so I'm too tired to start making scarves because that'll be another 3 or 4 hours for a scarf. So we're ready to actually start after picking the materials, preparing the dye pots, mordanting the fiber. Now we get to the moment we've all been waiting for, which is to actually take the scarf and layer the botanicals on it for the print. The next step, briefly, is to do what's called an iron water dip. So this is iron water that I created with rusty nails and rusty farm implements. And this is one of those things that will help the dyes to stay on the scarf after it's done processing. Now you don't want to leave it in iron water too long because it will actually corrode the scarf itself. It'll eat it away. After it's been dyed, I'll neutralize it. I'll get the rest of the iron out. But just that little dip will be enough. So I'm going to lay out my scarf, making sure that it's right side up. These scarves have a front and a back, and more than once I've layered it upside down and had to stop and start over again. But I've got this one right side up, it appears. So I just lay it out. Now, one thing that I do that I don't know that anybody else does, but I really like to put a tape measure underneath. And the reason I do that is these are not particularly matchy when I do my designs, but I do like to have visual balance. And so sometimes I by having the tape measure, I can see, 10 inches in I did this, and 10 inches in I want a balance. Now I'm just going to layer the plant material on, and there are two ways I can do that. One is just lay them on, but the other, if I really want to add to a little vividness, I can dip those also in the iron water. And I tend to like, let's see, that'd be 26. I tend to like to have an anchor piece at the center, unless I'm doing a prairie piece and then not. But this is just going to be sunflowers. This is our Hopi Black Dye Sunflowers. And so I'm just laying these leaves and sunflowers all along this piece. And I'm not going to be really complicated with this design. I am going to put the flowers themselves. And some of them I'll dip and some of them I won't. You get a different print if you place the leaf right side up or upside down. Again, I'm going to do a variety of both. Some will be right side up and some will be upside down. And when I do flowers, we're going to be rolling this up on a dowel rod. So when I put flowers or flower heads on here, you can see there's a little knob. Because you can see that's poking up. And what makes a really good botanical print is really good contact when you roll this onto the dowel rod. When you have something with that kind of height, it will really inhibit it being able to be rolled tight. So one thing I do is I just flatten that down. And by using the board, I'm less likely to just destroy the flower. Yeah, see, that's quite a bit flat. Oh, and it's already imparting color. There is a dye hammering technique where you can impart dyes by just hammering on plants, but I've never done it. So I'm just going to start laying this out, and this part can take quite a while, depending on how specific or detailed I want to get with the design. This can take an hour or 2 hours of the work, is to really get it visually in a way that I like and I think will convey an image that will be pleasing to the eye. So we'll get back to you when this is done. So the Hopi Black Sunflower seed dye has really darkened overnight on this dye blanket, which started out white. So we'll see. This may well be a fugitive, you know, and fugitive is dye that is really vibrant but won't stick on fabric. Or it may look really dark here, but when we actually get it onto the scarf, sadly, it may not convey this kind of color. We'll just have to see. This is an experiment. I've never worked with this before. So, the next thing we're going to do is Dave, my husband, will have to assist me here to lay the dye blanket. This is a two-person job. You can see the plant material that I've layered here, hopefully in a pleasing fashion. I had some extra sunflower seeds that I threw onto here just kind of randomly because I thought they might make little pops of color. In fact, I may take a few from the dye pot and do the same. The leftovers, I didn't throw them out yet. So we're gonna lay the dye blanket next and see what we end up with. Yeah, I'm gonna do this. This is kind of fun. All right. So here's the dye blanket. Again, I can do this by myself if I have to, but ideally it's a two-person job. So we just layer it over and then just gently lay it down over the scarf. Now I do what's called a resist layer. This is recycled plastic. Eco is a tricky term, and a lot of people use it in different ways. Some people say that you should never call your printing eco printing unless you're absolutely using no plastics or artificial materials. You're only working with nature, and I respect that. And then there are other people who don't have any regard for whether they're being ecologically sound and do whatever they do. And I don't necessarily respect that, since we have a planet with limited resources. What I try to do is the middle way. So this plastic that I'm using is plastic, but I still consider my process to be eco-printing because I rescued this plastic from a pallet at a home hardware store, one of those giant hardware stores. They were delivering a big flat truck, and they had this giant roll of plastic that was balled up sitting beside the flat truck. And I said, what are you going to do with that plastic? And they said, we're going to throw it away, lady. And I said, can I have it? And the guy looked at me like I was crazy, but said sure. And so he helped me roll it up and stuff it into the back of my station wagon. And I have been literally using that same gigantic roll of plastic that was destined for the landfill for 8 years now. I've never had to buy any plastic, and I saved that plastic from a landfill. Is it 100% eco-friendly? No, because I'm using plastic, but on the other hand, I am keeping it out of a landfill. So what this plastic does is it protects the design that I've created, so that as I roll this onto a dowel rod, if I don't have the plastic barrier, what will happen is you'll get this kind of muddy look where things are layered on top of each other, shadowing and so on. This plastic barrier prevents that. So what I'm going to do now is grab an Osage orange log, and I'm rolling it over those sunflower heads right now, just to make sure they're really smushed down. You can hear them kind of crunching, and I'm doing this carefully so that I don't dislodge the pattern that I just spent all this time designing. It'll dislodge some, obviously, but the idea here is you don't want it to be completely dislodged. So, yeah. Now I'm going to roll this, and the important thing about rolling this is that it's really tight. If there's good contact between the plant material and the fabric, then you're going to get a much better image at the end in finished product. So I really work hard to keep this. Now what worries me a little bit is my hands aren't turning purple. I would kind of hope that they are. That kind of lends to the fugitive idea that this may not convey. But we'll see. Now, I've got this completely rolled on here. I'm going to do one more step that I haven't seen this done in other places, but I do it and I find that it's really helpful. I have these rags, old tea towels, and I roll my scarf into the tea towel. And the reason I do that is because it creates a little steam packet, kind of like when I cook and I steam something. It's the same idea. So I think it helps the dye process, but in addition, it gets rid of rope marks. So we'll show you an example of what rope marks look like in a dye piece. And that can be a lovely design element, but if I don't want them, then this is one way to avoid getting them in my final piece, is I just put this tea towel around it. This is the other, okay, let's do it backwards. I want to roll with my piece, so I'm not unrolling the tea towel I just rolled on here. And again, this will help increase the contact. And I'm gonna roll super tight. And again, you can see this string that I've used many, many times. It's really dark. You can keep reusing string for a very long time. This is one of the reasons that I can only do a few of these in a day, because this is very labor intensive. It's really hard on my hands and my muscles. But I know that the more I wrap and the tighter I wrap and the better contact I get, the better final product will be. And I do a lot for that reason. I just keep it really snugged on here. I leave a little tail. It just helps me pull it out of the dye pot later. So I'm going to tie that. This is my little dye packet all ready to go. So we've got our roasting pan at a nice brisk simmer. And I'm going to lay this in here without touching the sides. The string hanging out, and we're going to roast this for 2 hours, and we'll see what we end up with. Fingers crossed we'll get some color transfer, but we'll see. So botanical printing, unlike other kinds of printing, has a fairly short history. It's very likely thought of that this has been rediscovered and that it's existed historically, getting the impressions of plant material on fabric. We've known about natural dyeing, of course, forever, but this idea of actually printing the impressions of leaves and flowers on material, that is really only about a quarter of a century long. Somewhere in the 1990s, maybe 30 years, somewhere in there. And so consequently, a lot of this really is still experimenting. I used a Hopi traditional dye to create the dye blankets, but that is not what this dye was created for. It was created to dye fabric itself, end of story, not to create a carrier blanket that was going to convey dye. So that's where we really don't know, despite the lovely color of the dye bath, what we're going to end up with here. You can see that we have a nice dye packet. It looks nice and sealed, and our plastic is well adhered. Oh, that's interesting. So the first look, so I'm pulling this down. Now, what I am going to do before I even reveal this is I want to get this plastic out from underneath, because that will influence the way the color looks. So here we are with our dye blanket and our silk scarf. You guys, we have purple. Look at that. Look at that. Oh! That is spectacular. Now, interestingly, the seeds that I placed on here acted as what's called a resist. See those little white dots? They didn't impart more purple. They actually, look, as I pull this seed off, see, it leaves a little white spot. But look at the leaves of the Hopi. Those are spectacular. For comparison, I added a few regular wild sunflower leaves. This is a wild sunflower leaf. This is a Hopi leaf. The front side and the back side. That is spectacular. See, this is, if I do it face down, see this leaf? This is face down. And it turned this great brown. This one was face up. And it did a different color. Let's see what there's the sunflowers themselves. There we go. And so I'm pulling all of this plant material off my dye blanket because you can reuse these dye blankets any number of times until they wear out. But we got purple. That was the thing. We weren't sure if we were going to get purple. We actually got purple. It conveyed to the dye blanket. I mean, from the dye blanket to the fabric. That is spectacular. Now, there's still uncertainty as to whether or not this will be what's called fugitive. What fugitive is are dye colors that initially look quite brilliant and then fade as time goes on. Frankly, all dyes do that, but the rapidity is what makes a real fugitive dye. Beets, for example, you can dye something with beet juice and it'll be a beautiful color. And then very quickly, within a matter of days, that color will fade to nothing. So what I will do with these Hopi scarves that I'm making here is I'm going to keep these. I'll keep this one for myself, both as the first experiment with it, but also as an experiment to see if the dye fades really quickly. If it does not, then this is something that I can add to my repository of dye materials that I can use. What I love, this is a cotton flannel dye blanket. And I want you to look at the beautiful colors that this conveyed even on the dye blanket. It's just lovely. That won't stay because we didn't mordant the dye blanket. We just soaked it in the dye material. So it won't stay on there. It'll rinse off eventually. But this, theoretically, because we've treated it, this should be stable. We should end up with this color. Now it will lighten a little bit as it dries. That's just what happens. But I have to say, as an experiment, I literally could not be happier. This is really a success on every measure that I can think of. This is quite amazing. I'm tickled. I used an old traditional dye recipe and heirloom seeds from a sunflower. And I want you to see, look at this. That is spectacular. Hopi Black Dye Sunflower seeds. Co-created this scarf. Dyed mostly with Hopi sunflowers and leaves, though there are a few wild sunflower leaves thrown in here too. What I'm doing next is I'm going to now neutralize. Remember, we put the rust on that scarf. We have to get that off or it will actually wear holes in the scarf. I'm putting just a drop of this fabric softener, textile softener that helps to remove things like that. And I'm also going to add a little fabric softener because the process of dyeing fiber makes the fabrics a little bit stiff. The other thing that I do is I'm going to add a tiny bit of baking soda, and that will also neutralize the iron on here. So, into the processing pot. Now see, I want you to notice it's not coming off too purple. There's a little extra dye that will come off. So this will sit for 15 minutes to neutralize it. Then I will iron this. Gosh, that color. Look at that. Absolutely stunning. We got good contact with those leaves. Look at that. I am immediately going to make more of these today. So this will sit for 15 minutes. I will, in 15 minutes, pull it out, rinse it, and then I'm going to iron it, which is going to help set the dye. That heat sealing with a hot iron. And then we will be done. It will be ready to wear. So as I said, this is an experiment, and we saw, which we have on video, the beautiful purple color that we got out of the dye bath. And what I wanted to show you now is in the neutralization bath, in only just a few minutes, it has completely transformed in color. There is a lot of chemistry involved in this. So the final color looks not to be purple. Now again, we still have beautiful print material, but you can see that background purple has completely disappeared. I'm not sure, since this is still wet, what it's going to end up being color-wise, but we'll find out. I'm guessing probably a gray, a rich gray. I find it interesting that the wild sunflowers tend to print blue, the actual flower heads. And with these, the Hopi sunflowers appear to print more of a green, which is interesting. And now, to show you the final result. Here it is. Just a few minutes ago, this was a vivid purple, but after neutralizing, washing, and then iron heat setting, this is what we've ended up with, which I have to say, despite the fact that I'm sad about the purple, I am delighted with the depth of color and texture that we got from this piece. I consider it a success. Unexpected results, but yet overall, I consider it a success. I'm delighted. So, I thought we were done with our Hopi Black Dye seed experiment, and then there was an addendum that we had to add. It happened late the other night, and it was too late to film, so I got the materials together and thought that we could just add this to the end of the process you saw the other day. These are some of the other pieces I've done. So, when I finished that first scarf, I was really happy with the vividness of the impressions that I got, but as you noted in the video, I was somewhat dismayed by the shift in color that was so dramatic after washing it. I realized later, without very much research, I knew there are mordants that help our dyes to stay on the fabric. I treat my scarves with mordants for the processes that we were doing here. There is another technique where you don't use mordants that's different. I'm not referencing that right now. But for this process, I did use a mordant, a process prior to dyeing the fabric to help the dyes to stay on the fabric. After you dye, you can do something, or even before as well, you can do something called a modifier where you can add another chemical to slightly shift. In this case, I used alum as a mordant, and cream of tartar to heighten the colors, which is known to work for protein fibers. If you add just a little bit of cream of tartar, it will brighten the colors. So when I do my mordanting with alum, I almost always, for my protein fibers, use a little bit of cream of tartar. What I forgot in terms of modifiers is baking soda, which you saw me sprinkle in the wash powder. That's a modifier, and that changes the pH dramatically of the water, which with sensitive dyes, and there are certain, I won't get into all the details and why this is, but there are certain dyes that are more sensitive to coloration shifts by temperature than others. And dyes like the Hopi Black Sunflower seeds are one that all the books have said they are very sensitive to heat and pH shifts. When I added that baking soda, it shifted the pH, which is what changed the color. I started thinking about that and wondering, is there a way I can shift it back? Well, the first thing I wanted to know was it for sure the baking soda that made that color shift? So I made another scarf, which I'm wearing right now, and you can see it has a lovely lilac color, just like the first one did before I put it in the dye bath. But in this case, I did in the wash bath after, rather. In this case, when I washed this one, I did not add baking soda, and it maintained this lovely lilac color. So that led me to thinking, I wonder if there was a way, because these particular types of dye, the Hopi Black Sunflower seed dyes, are sensitive, if I could shift it back. And I had the idea that maybe dipping in the alum mordant that I used at the beginning, not to re-mordant it, it's a whole different process, but using that as a modifier, just can I shift the pH again? So I took that gray scarf that you saw in the video earlier here, and I dipped it for about 15 minutes into my alum and cream of tartar mix, and this is what I ended up with. The beautiful lilac color, to my amazement, immediately returned. I was shocked and thrilled. And so, as we're looking at this, we can see both of these have this beautiful lilac color from those dye blankets. Now, what I had read before, what I've read in the books, these dyes that come from seeds, certain kinds of berries, are what are called fugitives, meaning they don't last. The question that I've not been able to answer so far is, how long is it that they will last? Will they last a day? Will they last a week or a month or a year? How long? What's the process for this fugitive nature, this temporary nature of this dye color? So I'm going to run this as an experiment for myself. I'm going to use these as I naturally do with my other scarves. I'll hang them in my closet, and I will rinse them off with cool pH neutral cleansers if need be, and I'll just see how long do they last. I've got this video documentation, so I can check back in 6 months and a year and see, did the color completely disintegrate? Does it stay? Does it fade just a little bit? I'm curious about this because there are certain other scarves that I have, some of them for 7 years, and they were dyed with materials that people told me were fugitive and wouldn't last. And what I found is that they are still lovely and vivid colors. So I'm not disbelieving the idea that these are fugitives. There's a chemistry to this, and the chemistry says the dye isn't stable. And having said that, I don't know how much people have experimented with using these over time to see what you do end up with. Because my thought is all of the clothing in my closet fades over time, whether I buy it commercially or whether I dye it myself. And so the question is it something that I can have for now? And is a year enough or 2 years? We'll find out. But I think it's worth the experiment because I have to say, taking in a one-day process, seeds from my flowers in my garden and making something this lovely is really worth experimenting with and seeing, even if it doesn't last 20 years. I will tell you, there are very few things in my closet that are 20 years old. So maybe if this only lasts a few years, that's okay. But I aim to find out, and I'll keep being a layperson experimenter, and hope you found this interesting and entertaining. As I said at the beginning, I had the little caveat, and I'll say again, I have no degree in textile arts or fiber arts. I am a almost 40-year practitioner who's been studying with a number of wonderful mentors and self-taught. And I'm just sharing because it's fun and interesting, and hoping as we all share what we learn and what we experience that we can help to educate each other. So thanks for sticking along with me, and hope this was entertaining. And that guy, he's not as big as the first one, but still pretty good size.